Occultly, this is an auspicious weekend, being the equinox tomorrow, I believe. And here we are gathered.
Just like the old days.
I will present the Yoga of Radiant Presence from a slightly different perspective than I often do. And hopefully it will prove interesting or useful for you. Superficially, there are two ways in which experience seems to be normally interfaced with. The one way is the way of identification that we're all very familiar with. It basically consists of that which you would usually qualify as subjective. So your thoughts, the sensations of your body, your emotions, your motivations, your quandaries as you grapple with ways of dealing with situations in your life and apparent situations and so on and so forth. Is normally felt to be me. It's felt to be, well, yeah, this is me, this is my persona, this is my being, this is my, whatever I am, my entity. And there is a second way in which experience is interfaced with, which is generally felt to be more or less other. So that which seems to constitute the environment, that which is present in experience, but is not felt to be a part of what you ordinarily would identify with. And this is speaking in broad strokes for, suppose, some average human perspective in terms of consensus reality experiencing. This objective dimension of experience is felt to be out there, is felt to more or less be not me, is felt to be beyond my control, whereas the subjective pole is often felt to be somewhat in control. One can at least feel like one is, trying to think one's thoughts, trying to steer one's emotions, trying to steer one's actions, and so on and so forth. Whereas the objective pole is characterized by just being there, it's just showing up. Just like these pictures that are on the wall, they just happen to be there. You didn't put them there. You don't know who put them there. You don't know why they put them there, other than the hopes of making enormous amounts of money, no doubt. But that's all speculation. Or the floor, or the dirt that's on the floor. It's just there. It's a given. It's just showing up. Or the light that's shining in the door. Most people don't feel like they're doing that light. They feel like the light is just there. It's just an objective fact. It's a given. It's the environment. It's not me. Me is Peter Brown, and what am I doing here, and what am I thinking about, and what am I feeling, and what are my motivations, and how does my body feel, and so on and so forth. I mean, we're all very familiar with this. Obviously, it doesn't need a lot of elaboration. So this normal condition, this normal sense of a doubleness in experience of self and other, which we can speculate may be more or less the norm for your average person, is in fact the spiritual problem, is in fact the very difficulty that true spirituality, that yoga, attempts to address.
Could you
Now,
I put it on a music stand so it's up higher for
that
you.
might be a little precarious.
Okay.
Once I get set up here, I'll begin. So, so this is this sort of a doubleness that we can speculate or perhaps remember is more or less the way ordinary human mentality approaches experience. The true condition, the condition which yoga attempts to discover and explore and ultimately integrate with, is the way in which, and the fact that these two modes are actually one. They're actually the same thing. That they seem different and that they're held to be different and that they're felt to be different is a complete misunderstanding. It's a complete erroneous interpretation that the intelligence in its power can generate seamlessly, relatively, and convincingly, and virtualize it as if it was the case. So that for the average person, if you told them you're the objective pole just as much as the subjective pole, you're the sun just as much as your thoughts or your body or something, they would look at you and think you're nuts or something, perhaps. So discovering, exploring, and ultimately integrating with the way that this is so is yoga. And the discovery that this is so is realization or enlightenment or what have you. You can throw all sorts of fancy notions at it, but it is what it is. And it's both less grand and far more grand than can possibly be said. So, in terms of discussing it superficially or just looking at it in terms of discussion, it's fairly easy to understand conceptually, or perhaps intuitively, the way that this is so. For example, take the example of a dream. In a dream, if you're lost in the dream, normal dreaming, you find yourself in some apparent circumstances or environment, and you try to function or orient yourself or work within this apparent situation in whatever way seems appropriate. And you may struggle with things, or may succeed or fail with things, or may go about things with more or less, at least fundamentally, more or less as you would in the waking world, although things may seem to be more flexible and so on and so forth, obviously. And in the dream, you think that the entity that is you in the dream is you and is functioning and is struggling with these circumstances. And you may feel like the circumstances that are present in the dream are just there. They're an objective pole. They're just a given. They're not you. You're in a nightmare and there's some monster chasing you. The monster is definitely not you. And you want to get your ass away from there so he doesn't catch you and have his way with you or whatever the fantasy is. But consider, when you're dreaming, the dreaming, which is you, is doing all of it. The dreaming puts the monster that's chasing you there just as much as it puts the you that that's trying to run away from the monster there. No more, no less. The dreaming puts the environment within which the monster is chasing you, or whatever. I mean, I'm using a silly example, but obviously that's irrelevant. The dreaming puts that there and is doing that completely, entirely, as thoroughly and no less thoroughly than it is doing you and your thoughts and emotions and whatever reactions you may seem to be having within the circumstances and the apparent structure of the dream. Then if we consider waking life, in waking life, we like to pretend we're in control, or we'd like to be in control, or we're a little in control, or we're sort of doing ourselves, and sort of doing our thoughts, and sort of doing controlling our actions and all of that. But if one looks very closely, it's possible to notice, to discover that all of these conditions are basically just appearing. For example, even if suppose you are doing your thoughts and doing your struggling with things and trying to figure out the right way to do things and so on. Why are you motivated and oriented the way you are? Someone else would have a very different orientation. Where do you get your motivation from? Where do you get the pattern of your desires, the pattern of your urges from? They're given, they appear. Why are you? Why is someone else someone else? Why do you choose what you choose? Why do they choose what they choose? Did they decide to be that? Did they decide to have that character and have those motivations and urges? Or is it just a given? It's just proof, I didn't decide to be Peter Brown. It's just lo and behold, I was. And I mean, that's sort of regressing, trying to analyze it too. So even if you are doing your thinking, then the motivations of that, you are doing that. At some point you get to a point where it's quite clear and obvious that I'm not in control of my basic, urges, my basic drives. I like to avoid pain. Sure. Did I put that there? Could I stop it? Can I just say, okay, now I'm not going to try and avoid pain anymore? Good luck. So these things obviously are mysteriously present. They are given, they appear. And if one looks, excuse me. If one looks more precisely at the train of thought, for example, which people who engage in serious meditation, for example, or have experience with extreme drug experiences and that sort of thing, or any various kinds of extreme experiences, will be more familiar with the thoughts themselves, the ideas themselves, spontaneously appear, instantaneously, essentially out of nowhere, with zero stability. And zero duration, and an inconceivable, disjointed and incoherent rainbow of implications and meanings and notions and inspiration. So the fantasy that one is thinking one's thoughts, or one is steering the train of one's thoughts, is very easily seen through if one places oneself in a orientation of noticing that that is in fact the case. And the same with all other aspects of functioning. Now, this may be difficult to explore, typically because people are often so deeply entrenched in the essentially hypnotic frame of reference that that I am me. Of course I'm doing my thoughts. Of course I'm doing my actions. I can put my hand up. I can put my hand down. Who else is doing it? I'm doing it because I want to do it. I mean, it's easy to see that and it's easy to say that. But in fact, if one looks very closely, it gets stranger than that. It doesn't actually resolve clearly to being that. And in fact, is not that at all. Not that it's not you. And now we're getting into an interesting aspect, which will be the next phase of the talk. But the you that it is the actual you. And if we go back to the dream analogy, in the dream, you may feel like the you that is you is the entity that is struggling in the circumstances in the dream, or maybe not struggling, if you're lucky and having a fun dream. But in fact, the you that is you really is the dreamer. You're the dreamer. And the dreamer is, of course, dreaming the you that seems to be in the dream, that seems to be not doing the dream, just as much as it is dreaming the dream itself. So the real you is doing the you that feels like you in terms of consensus reality orientation, as well as everything else. So this is all you. Really, it really is all you. Or you are all it, you could say. I mean, there's no reason to personalize it, but there's no reason not to personalize it. Different philosophical approaches go to great extremes in terms of it's all not self, or it's all self. But ultimately, those kinds of arguments, those kinds of distinctions are childish, because it is what it is, and it can certainly be described as all self and described as all not self. So it's just a matter of semantics ultimately, because it cannot be ultimately analyzed as to what it is. But that it is exactly and precisely what it is discoverable and is beyond dispute. And this is the nature of this yoga. Hey, I'm not Stan. Give me the wrong copy.
Not as it said, there's two of us. You-
Of course you are Stan. So.
Getting ahead of us.
Don't give it away.
I'm not Stan, Stan's me.
All right.
In his universe, I may be him, but that's his problem. So, they're just not yet. I'll talk probably most of the morning, and then we'll get into a no doubt spirited discussion. Perhaps not so spirited, who knows? Now, a major aspect of the challenge in all of this is the flexibility and the power of intelligence. Intelligence powerfully can erect virtual scenarios that very strongly, convincingly seem to be various ways. And people that are skilled in brainwashing, no doubt, use and know and exploit this fact. But in actual fact, everyone is brainwashed, essentially. Everyone has been programmed. And the programming is insidious because typically one is not aware that that is the case because of the incredible power and skill that the intelligence has in erecting these virtual scenarios. They seem self-verifying. They seem undeniable. They seem absolutely true. You know, if you went up to the average person on the street perhaps and said, you know, you're all of this. You're not your body. They might think you're not. Well, this is California, so probably not. In the Midwest, if you
Oh, yeah. So,
in California, they probably go, right on. So this amazing facility that the intelligence has with erecting these seemingly seamless virtual scenarios that seem self-verifying within the context of the scenario, it seems self-evident that the scenario is true, and any evidence or information to the contrary seems to be patently and obviously erroneous, wrong. So that factor is one of the major challenges in looking at this and exploring this. And another aspect of that, you might say the other side of the same coin, another aspect that becomes very challenging about exploring this is the nature of what this is, the nature of what is here is very, very, very slippery. It does not resolve itself into simple and obvious apparent condition, which of course enables all of these sort of virtual scenarios that the imagination and that the intelligence generates. And since it is so flexible, since what is here is essentially the ultimate Rorschach blot, it can't say for sure that it's this or that, or that it's not this and not that, which is an ideal environment for the creation of arbitrary interpretations, because they're very hard to disprove, because the actuality is very squishy and very slippery and very essentially impossible to pin down as to exactly how it is. So part of this yoga, part of this exploration is exploring the way in which that is so, the way and becoming very comfortable with slipperiness and unresolvability and multidimensionality, where conditions are not necessarily this or that, and they're not necessarily not this and not that. What they actually are is strangely multidimensional and strangely, pregnant with implication, but intrinsically not locking into any of the implications, which again is, of course, fodder for the imagination, which can take all of this soup of raw material and select arbitrary strands of it and bang, lock into that and create a virtual scenario. This is exactly what has happened with the creation of normalcy, with the creation of human beings inhabiting their bodies in the life in this big world that we all live in society, and the horrible political situation we're in, and blah, 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 all the details of all that. None of it actually exists as such. It's actually not at all like that. But it's difficult to see the way in which that's the case. And this is, again, the essence of the practice of this yoga. So, where does that put us? That's always the question, and there's no answer to that question. This again is the very nature of the yoga. Where am I? Who am I? And what's going on? You ask the question, and there's a resounding silence. I mean, ordinarily, the mind jumps right up and says, "Oh, well, you're Peter Brown, and you're giving a spiritual talk, and blah 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 blah." But if I'm honest, if I really look, you know, what the fuck is going on? What is here? What's happening? What is this? How is it? There's no answer. But here it is. So it's here to explore, and an artful yogi, a skilled yogi, will explore it in the context of that non-answer, in the context of, because in that context, you are engaged with the actuality of what it is without holding it to be this or that. And as soon as the intelligence holds it to be this or that, you're essentially lost in terms of the yoga is concerned. On the other side of the coin, it's inevitable that the intelligence will come in and hold it as this or that, because that's the nature of the intelligence. So there's this. It's not a simple either or of being in orientation or outside the context of a rigid orientation. So again, this is another area where the yogin has to develop flexibility of not wanting to lock it into not being an interpretation. Because of course, even interpretations aren't really interpretations. And the interpreting intelligence is never going to stop spitting out these virtual scenarios. And portions of the attention are never going to stop being seduced into them to explore them. But there's always a huge portion, perhaps the majority portion of the experiential field, which is in fact not a portion of these virtual realities that the imagination is trying so skillfully to sell. And this is the great opportunity for the yogi, is the background of experience, the portions of experience that are sort of plain vanilla or floating at the periphery of focuses of attention, or boring and uninteresting, which actually constitutes the majority of the experiential field. Also, portions of experience which are less coherently structured, apparently. So, for example, when you're going to sleep, what are you experiencing? You're not experiencing anything particular. It's just it's nothing. It's not particularly coherent. It's not particularly formed or formal or structural. It's sort of an amorphous relative incoherence, but it's not nothing. And in that, for that fact, it is that ilk, that sort of range of experience. There's someone out in the store. I don't know if is Pam here? Oh, Pam must be watching thing.
She's right here.
Oh, cool. Sorry. So that ilk of experience, that portion of experience, which is sort of vague and unresolved and just weird, non-structural vibes, whatever, is a bonanza. It's a gold mine for the yogi, because here is a range of experience, a bandwidth of experience that lends itself less easily to the imaginations, to the intelligence's machinations of trying to resolve it into something. Because it doesn't, you can't build much with it. It doesn't have much structurality or coherence or persistence or duration. And it happens that, in fact, the majority, and just as speaking volumetrically or speaking in terms of the proportion of the experiential field that is present, is more like that than is like structure. For example, even in your visual field, which for most humans is probably the dominant or orientational field of experience, there's a relatively small portion that's in focus at any given moment. And everything out here is vague and fuzzy, and you don't even know what it is. I mean, I can see colors and I can see shapes, but I can't really see what they are. So just even in my visual field, just looking in terms of the area of it, the superficial area of it, probably 80% of it is vague. It's not anything in particular. I mean, it's something, but it's squishy. It's not locked in very precisely to me, this way or that way. Now, and of course, all the other sense fields apply to that too. But the real bonanza is when you start getting extrasensory, because the majority of our experience is not within the sense fields, in fact. The majority of our experience is vague vibes and flavors and innuendos, and you can't put words on it because the human language is oriented towards designating structures within the sense fields, basically. But much of experience is outside the sense fields, and typically we don't talk about it or think about it much, or even know that it exists. Again, unless you're a tripper or a deep meditator or something like that, because it just doesn't attract your attention very much. It's like, well, there's nothing going on there. There's no action there. There's no soap opera there. Typically, the attention is drawn to some place where there's a story, where there's, what am I going to, wait a minute, this is fun. What am I going to get out of this? What am I annoyed with here? What's my orientation? What's the motivation of my character? It's all a kind of the attention tends to be drawn towards these kinds of egoic involvements, strictly by habit. It's a habit, because that's what has seemed in the past, that's what has been held to be relevant, juicy, important, powerful. And in fact, it's a bill of goods, it isn't. From the point of view of yoga, exactly the opposite is the case. What's really powerful, what's really empowering, what's really liberating, and what's really the strongest actuality is the nature of experience outside of all of these structural orientations that the imagination fixates on as being a part of a game structure that it can get involved in and fight the good fight. So that being the case, how to do the yoga in terms of practice? What do you do? Well, obviously, what you're doing is engaging with your experience. Of course, you're always engaging with your experience, so there's nothing new there. But rather than engaging with your experience habitually and automatically, letting yourself being sucked into your favorite channels of your life story, so the great and ongoing saga of you, you can look a little farther afield. You can start to look at the edges of your experience, or in the cracks between these solid structures and so on and so forth, and begin to find aspects of experience that you don't know what they are. You don't really know how they are. But they're not nothing. And this is the powerful fact. And you go to say, just something simple, go to the edges of your vision. It's a very simple exercise. You don't need an altered state to do. You go to the edge of your vision where you can barely see anything. What's there? Well, it's not nothing, but I can't say what it is. It doesn't come into focus. But what is there? And again, there's no answer to that question. You ask the question, and there's no answer. So you be with that no answer and feel the way it is what it is. This is the essential nature of practice of yoga and radiant presence. Is you feel what is present and explore the nature of what it is without holding it to be or expecting it to resolve to being this way or that way. And you will discover that, in fact, not only is this doable, but you will discover something there that is self-verifyingly powerful, vital, interesting, astounding, that is entirely beyond words to describe. And this is what you actually are. This is what this actually is. This is even what the machinations of your egoic investments actually are. And all of this is discoverable clearly, directly, and self-verifyingly, simply by looking, because it's right here. It's actually findable. Now, what makes this even easier is the fact you're already doing it. It's not like you need to learn to do something different. Most of your experience is, in fact, already actively engaged with these amorphous, slippery, nonlinear dimensions of experience. It's already happening. You know, and in psychology or in pop psychology, it might be called the unconscious. You know, there's this vast portion of your actual experience where you're already dancing with these transdimensional energies. But the you that's doing it and the conditions within which it's being done are unthinkable. They're unspeakable. So, of course, we don't think about it and we don't speak about it in instant unconscious. And then there's this portion of this very small spotlight that is thinkable and is talkable about. And so the consciousness goes to that. An interesting sort of an image for the way this works. You can imagine a vast, 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 vast warehouse that takes up like square miles, inconceivably vast. Maybe like that warehouse in Indiana Jones where the CIA stores all the alien technology or whatever. There's this vast warehouse that goes on just, you know, for like thousands of miles, just inconceivably vast, but it's completely dark, has no lights in it whatsoever. And you've got a flashlight. And so you walk into this vast space. You don't even know it's a vast space because you can't see it's vast. You sort of hear it might be a little vast. And so you turn on your flashlight and what do you get? Just one little thing lit up. Oh! And all of a sudden you're very interested in what's in the flashlight, simply because that's all you can see. There's nothing else to be interested in. And this is very much the way consciousness, the way you know, most average people, let's say, normally orient to their experience. You know, we're just really fascinated by what's in that little flashlight beam. You know, me, my history, my friends, my enemies, my ambitions, my failures, my success. You know, is there any my failures? You know, but all of that is just within this little beam, and all the rest of it is what? And you would say what? And there's no answer. What is it? Because there's no light to see it, but it's not nothing. And this is the powerful field of the engagement of this yoga. Is the portions of experience that is not known, but is in fact being known unconsciously, or let's say without holding it to be anything. You know, our conscious mode is not comfortable with things that aren't something or something else. The conscious mode wants to pin things down. It wants it to be this or that. Or it wants it to be not this or not that. It wants something. Whereas this is like, what is it? No answer. How do you deal with no answer? But there's never been any answer. We can imagine when you were born, when you were 1 second old, what is it? What was it? Just, it's not even what the fuck, because you don't know about what's and you don't know about fucks.
I love that.
And it never stopped being that. It still is that. Although you've learned all these elaborate games you can play with yourself of being able to pretend to designate things and call things names and say, oh, this is a man, this is a woman, this is a floor, this is a bag, this is a sweater. It's like I'm like a trained monkey. I'm regurgitating words that I was taught to say when I was pointing at something which loosely approximated some notion of what the word is supposed to refer to, but it doesn't say what anything is. It doesn't say what it actually is or how it works, and that's never been. It's always been an open question. So in a way, this is just a reality check, and you've never stopped knowing that. Everyone always knows that they don't know anything. Everyone always knows that they've been faking it all their lives. I mean, this is the basis of insecurity. This is the basis of, Weltschmerz, of the stress and terror of being a human being, because you're not really, and you've been faking it. Because you remember, because you learned how to fake it when you were a child, and you have unconscious memories of having done that. You knew you didn't really know anything, but, mommy or daddy says, oh, that's a truck. And you go, huh? And say, that's a truck, huh? It's a truck. Huh? Yay, good boy. It's like, so you learn to regurgitate and spit back a call and response, which is meaningless, but you get big strokes for it.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is the essence of essentially all human conscious functioning. It's the essence of all, or let's say the lion's share of sense of social identity, sense of individuality, blah, 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 self-image, that stuff. But you've always known that it's not really like that. So which is actually a very powerful fact. That's not a problem, that's a solution. Because it turns out that not knowing is powerful. Not knowing is empowering. Not knowing is revealing. And from the point of view of yoga, above all, not knowing is liberating. When you discover the unresolvability of what this actually is, or what you actually are, this turns out to be having struck the spiritual gold mine, the spiritual mother lode. That was kind of fun. I was sort of hoping I could take us someplace, and kind of felt good about that. So anyway, that's pretty much the whole schmear of yoga radiant presence, really, right there in a nutshell. I call it yoga of radiant presence, not completely arbitrarily, because it is a yoga, which means a process of engagement with actuality that ultimately can accomplish something. Or in this case, let's just, if you want to be technical, you can say it can appear to accomplish something. And it's radiant presence because what is here, this actuality that alone exists, that is indescribable and that is unanalyzable and that cannot be pinned down at all in terms of any aspect of what it is present. In other words, it's slippery and multidimensional, but it's actual. It's real. I mean, this shit is here. Here is here. Is. And so I use the word presence to try to indicate that, to try to sum up this fact of actuality. And I call it radiant because it unendingly and unceasingly and apparently intrinsically presents as a barrage of infinite apparent qualities. All of the flavors and vibes and colors and sounds and textures and, all this we don't have names for. You never find presence. The emperor never has no clothes. There's always an infinite range of qualities that are being presented, which of course in a certain sense is the cause of all the problems, because that gives the radiance of all of these qualities gives the imagination the basis to create its fantasies and its stories of pain and suffering and insufficiency out of where none actually exists. Well, I've been talking for almost an hour. You feel like you want a 5-minute break, or should we just take another hour and chat? 5 minutes. No.
Chat.
Okay. So
Dive in.
I said dive in.
dive in,
Yeah.
5 minutes, dive in.
Dive in 5 minutes.
So please, in general, in discussion, the important aspect of this is not theory, it's not notions. The important aspect of this is your experience, and the way it's presenting to you and the way you may or may not be struggling with it or what have you. So please try to keep, please try to keep the focus of any of our discourse on your actual experience right here, right now. Because of course, any conundrums that are presenting will be found right here, right now, in fact. And the ultimate solution of liberation and transcendence will also be found right here, right now. Very convenient.
I'm finding knowing things or grasping to know things and things that are familiar to be kind of sickening a little bit. It's starting to be a little sickening in that. Because it feels superficial, or that it's like if you're familiar with something, it means you know it, and that's it's stopping way too short. And I find the whole notion of that there's and I think the bill of goods that we're getting sold by non-duality, in that life, there's some place that you find that's just you can rest, and things so fucking cacophonous and it's like this room. It's like blah, I don't know where this notion of like this steady state thing comes from. I think it's such a
Another fantasy.
yeah.
It's another arbitrary fixation on the unfixatable, in the unfixatable. There's no limits to the way that intelligence tries to turn this into something.
Yeah.
And much and probably even most and maybe even almost all of spirituality is no exception, where rather than actually going to the actuality, which is entirely and completely intrinsically transcendental, it tries to find something it can, there's non-duality, there's endless peace, there's eternal whatever. And just a more fantasy, you may as well be a drunk in a bar picking fights, in terms of there's no hierarchy of one erroneous fantasy better or worse than another erroneous fantasy. The erroneous fantasy of finding peace and yes. By the way, chai is being served up front. It's way too expensive and way good, so strongly recommended if you've got deep pockets. So, but there's no hierarchy, thinking that you're finding peace is actually not a superior condition to being an asshole, rolling drunks in the alley and setting them on fire or something for kicks. Really, I mean, it's one, from the point of view of moral human perspective, it's easy to generate some obvious outrage, but from the point of view of spirituality, there's absolutely no difference. There's no hierarchy. Delusion is delusion, and holding this to be any particular way is intrinsically delusion. Period. Bang. Across the board. There's no shades of gray. But it's slippery. It's very slippery because it doesn't mean that holding things to be a certain way is bad, or should be stopped, or is inferior. It's just that holding things to be a certain way isn't actually holding things to be a certain way. And as one discovers the nature of what this actually is, retroactively, one will discover that delusion is actually not delusion, which of course is the high water mark of liberation. You're liberated from needing to be liberated. Because delusion never existed. Delusion is liberation, the intrinsic action of liberation. And hey, go figure. But the point being, this is directly discoverable. And especially in practice, the point being, there's no point trying to upgrade your delusions. There's no point trying to extricate yourself from normalcy and move into some harmonious, new age bullshit, because it's just as much bullshit. And mind you, that's fine. But don't kid yourself that you're actually getting anything.
Or go ahead and kid yourself.
Well, ultimately, yeah.
So now I don't even know if I ought to say what I was going to say. So I've been playing with, it's hard to kind of put it into words, but I'll stumble around. So the awareness of presence in relation to what's happening. If I'm driving my car, or if I'm, doing some other activity, connecting with this awareness and what I'm doing. And then there are other times that I find myself, that I have lost, seemingly lost. I know that it's not actual, but I know that I have seemingly lost the connection with the awareness, because then I have become identified with whatever engagement I'm in out there. So I kind of see this as a process, but it's just something I've just been starting to play with in the last 10 days.
Yeah.
So this timing of this
Okay.
talk is amazing.
Wrong awareness. The awareness that you can lose or not lose is not the relevant awareness. Because losing and not losing the false awareness happens in the context of the true awareness, or it wouldn't exist at all. It's only the true awareness that matters. Awareness as it can come and go is just game structures. It's just orientations of perspectives. It's not an actual event.
An orientation of a perspective.
Yeah. Presence is never more or less. Presence simply means is.
Okay.
And if you are deluded and confused and have no awareness and have no presence, the fact you use the word are, you are that means all of that is completely present. And that's the presence that matters. The presence that you can do or not do, that can come and go, is just another game you play with yourself. And it's of no importance at all.
The little thing I'm playing with, what I'm hearing is it's kind of a nice little game.
Yeah. It's just, but it's of no value, essentially. That's why I recommend exploring your experience outside the context of something you're doing or not doing. Find a patch of dirt on the wall outside the building they're in. Don't worry about what you're doing or not. Don't be narcissistic or self-absorbed in terms of analyzing your own supposed mental condition, because there's nothing there of value. The only thing that's of value is the fact that it exists. And if you look at something that you have no intrinsic game structure or orientation around, because you don't give a shit, it's just completely neutral. A speck of dirt on the floor, whatever, doesn't matter.
And just
The sound of an air conditioner, anything that is not part of something you can orient to or do or not do or can come and go. It's just some weird presence. That's a more productive place to orient, because you're less liable to be seduced into playing games with it.
so
And it's fine to be playing the games,
yeah.
but the point is to notice the context that the games are happening in. Because within the games, you're liable to just be seduced back into more games, which is just unending samsara, as we say in the trade.
So just putting one's attention there and just seeing what's there. Is that
Yeah, just not even put your attention, just feel it. Feel the there-ness of there. And if you feel the there-ness of there someplace where the mind doesn't have much it can grab hold of to start doing its machinations on, you're sort of stacking the deck in your favor.
that's amazing. Thank you.
I like this.
This is a part.
Parade should be out there. Listen to the sound of those horns. Perfect noticing material. I've done such a good presentation, there's no questions. I love it.
We're stunned.
Okay, I'll go home now.
We're
What makes the horns such good material?
I'm sorry?
What makes the horns such good material?
Their startling, unpredictable nature, the fact that you're not doing them, the fact that you don't know if you like them or hate them, everything.
These are hard to parse.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the question I'm going to ask, but in a lucid dream, when all of a sudden you have a lucid dream, you go, oh my God, that's the coolest thing in the whole wide world. And I was almost hearing you say that, that's like finding the on and off switch to the flashlight in the dream.
Yeah, the analogy you're giving isn't very clear, I would say, but yeah, a lucid dream is when you see that it's a dream, and as soon as you see that it's a dream, you're seeing it's all you. Seeing a lucid dream is essentially seeing reality. I'm sorry?
And you can create then different things because you
Right.
realize that you're awake
Right,
in the
but
dream.
you're right, but that's less the point. The powerful point about a lucid dream is you're seeing that it's all you. You're seeing that you are, what it is what you are. In other words, you're not the persona that you were in the dream, you're all of it,
Yes.
because it's you, because you're doing it. And then, of course, you can then play around with it. Which brings an interesting point in terms of yoga, in terms of liberation. Suppose you engage in this yoga, and suppose you get to the point where, wow, I get it. I really, really get it. This is it. All of this is it. This is me. I am it. Blah, 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 whatever. Bullshit. But you feel that. It's just a fact. And that's called realization. That's enlightenment. It's liberation. But then, well, you actually don't have to. It's not obligatory to trade in your clothes, to give away your possessions and trade in your clothes for a loincloth and go sit in the Himalayan mountains. You can, but in fact, it's not obligatory. What should you do? Whatever the hell you want, because it doesn't matter. There's no. It doesn't. It's a zero-sum game. You can't get anything. You can't lose anything. So it's exactly like a lucid dream. When you discover you're in a lucid dream, what should you do? Anything you damn well want.
I
anything you
guess
can.
the other question also is that after experiencing that, you're always looking in this reality for that switch
Right, good.
and
Keep
how
it
to
up.
find that switch, because I didn't do it in the dream, it just happened.
Right.
And so how do I find the switch
Well,
if
that's
I
what-
didn't do it the first
That's
time?
what we've been talking about all morning, is where to look for that switch. And where you look is, if you explore the fringes of your experience that are more amorphous, that you don't know exactly what they are, you're liable to discover that what's there, everything that you do know what it is actually the same way, is actually amorphous too, which is the same way as discovering it's all a dream. In essence, this is all a dream. In essence, there is no waking state. But to discover that is the equivalent of going lucid, is the equivalent of seeing exactly the way that that's the case. Pretending won't do any good. But it is possible to see because it's literally true. But it demands inspiration and a lot of intelligent engagement. It's not a simple mechanistic thing that is just, oh, well, you know, you go over here and you do that and bang, done deal. Maybe, I mean, for some people, maybe it is, but, you know, not predictably. So typically, you can take the kind of information that we're discussing here today and play with it and see if you can muster sufficient wit and inspiration and luck and intelligence and stumble onto a way to see that, a way to play with that, a way to see that that is the case.
I'm kind of upset with my own process because I think I basically go to these things because I get lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, that's viable.
yeah, so clearly I believe that humans exist. In other words, individual humans exist, and that there's something to go and do to be with humans. But then I become this total mental chameleon, where whatever group I'm in, I believe whatever the heck the people are
Sure. It's convenient, then you're one of the gang.
I'm getting a little upset with myself for doing that.
Right. Okay. But see, whether you do that or not is not the point, because the point of this is not to stop doing that. The point of this is not to not do that. The point of this is that you can possibly discover the context within which you're doing that, and that context is where the good news is, not whether you do that or you stop doing that. It's not like you're supposed to believe people don't exist. It doesn't matter what you believe. You can believe anything you want. The point is to discover the way in which they actually don't. and when you discover the way in which they don't exist, they don't disappear. They aren't negated. They just aren't what you thought they were. And you can still think anything you want. You can still want to be in company and still want to. That's all cool. Who cares? That's fun. I mean, everyone likes that. Everyone likes company and an interesting discussion or whatever. You know, that's all good. That's not a problem. But that's not the process.
I think that life should have some kind of meaning.
Well, it does, but the meaning it has is not a meaning that the word meaning really applies to.
Yeah.
But it has enormous meaning. But it's not a meaning that you could call meaning. It's a meaning. It's a meaning that is like the meaning of an incredible, beautiful sunset.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably meaningful, but it's like someone says, "Okay, so tell me the meaning of this." It's like, what? Pretty?
I think it took me back a little bit to the, you mentioned something about children started agreeing with their parents, basically to get fed and hugs and stuff.
Yeah, of course.
And
We've
so
all been there.
make decisions. I mean, this was, again, within the framework of illusion that we exist when we make decisions, but it sort of took me back to some memory of getting co-opted for the first time. Whereas my reality would be like scribbling or throwing clay or just totally messing around.
Yeah. See, kids, small kids live in both worlds very comfortably. Small kids are a lot like yogis, I think, which may be why Christ is reported as having said, unless you become like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven.
I see.
Because kids, they're in the middle of the brainwashing and they learn all this training and they learn all this stuff. But then you can watch like a 3-year-old and they're just standing around like, what are they doing? They're not doing anything. They're just doing, you know, because they aren't in a world where it needs to make sense or where it needs to be explained or where they're doing anything. They're just dancing with energy. They're dancing with their being, which is all anyone's ever doing. It's just that most of us have been brainwashed into doing it in a very constrained, rigid way according to certain elaborate rules called social behavior or whatever. It's like, you're in this room, you better damn well be playing Monopoly. No other games are allowed in here. Why can't I dance around? No, you're in here to play Monopoly, so play Monopoly. But see, like I was saying, the little kids can multitask because they can be going to second grade and learning their addition tables and multiplication tables, and at the same time they go in the yard and in the sandbox and they just start throwing sand around and playing with sand and pulling pigtails and stuff just arbitrarily. So that's the trick. That's the path of the yogi in a way is a path of regression to childhood.
Okay.
Where you just let yourself play. Let yourself be with your experience loosely, even as portions of you are not doing that. It's not like you need to discipline yourself or come down on yourself for the portions of you that aren't doing that. Just let them go. Let them, okay, so I'm this neurotic person that was motivated to do all these crazy things. Okay, cool. So that's good. So that's happening when it's happening. But there's a whole lot of free time around the edges of that where that's not happening, and you can trip there. You can have fun. And whatever, just let go. Just, be with your experience and dance with it. Any old way that the mood strikes.
Cool.
Yeah, totally. It is cool and it's fun.
I
I've
want
gotten
to.
to the point where I will even go to teachers that contradict each other just because I'm sick of believing.
No, that's a good strategy. And that's easy. Just pick any 2 teachers and you'll find that asshole said that. He's wrong. I'm right.
This metaphor about the child when you did that in Seattle, it just opened up a lot of doors for me. Just that image of you, and
Cool.
it's meant really a lot.
Cool. Go through the doors.
What?
Go through the doors. At least-
Got it. Okay.
At least
Yeah.
step through them every once in a while.
Yeah.
Timidly, if you need to.
Probably. I don't know if it would be helpful for anybody else if you say a little bit more about that dream state. I just find that
No, it's too
okay.
not important.
Too
Theoretical.
conceptual.
If someone is having specific issues in their own experience of dreaming, we can talk about that.
Okay.
So what I notice in my experience here and in general, like when I expand into the fringes of my awareness, there's an energetic opening, there's a spacious openness, and there's also something that I don't like that arises, which is anxiety or like a spacing out.
Right.
And so like investigating, I'm just feeling into like how to investigate that, because it seems like to not make that a problem, that's just an experience that's
See, what I would say is ignore it, because
okay.
that kind of reaction to the discovery of this openness is not intrinsic to the openness. It's intrinsic to the portion of yourself which feels that it's urgent to have a handle on things.
Yeah.
And no one cares what it thinks. For this purposes, you're leaving that mode and exploring a new mode where none of that matters. Now, unfortunately, it's not as simple as turning one off and turning one on. So you can have you can have a reaction. In fact, it's very common for people exploring this stuff to find themselves, whoa, hold the phone, wait a minute, this is too much. What's all, wow, this is too weird, this is too crazy, it's scary, it's whatever, some degree of discomfort. But the discomfort is not due to what you're discovering. The discomfort is due to the fact that what you're discovering is radically different than the familiarity that you're used to thinking in some way or another is important. And so there's some urgency in preserving and defending the structured orientation. And so when you begin to flirt with this unstructured orientation, the structured orientation, sends out the guard, calls out the guards, sends out the dogs. It's like, wait a minute, oh my God, he's screwing with our delicate balance, stop it.
Yeah, it's like a protective mechanism.
Yeah. And so I would say as much as possible ignore it.
Okay.
Just trying to keep exploring. I mean, there's no point, terrifying yourself or really pissing yourself off or something. But just, okay, it feels weird, but just keep playing with it anyway. And what happens is, after a while, when you begin to have more and more and more ongoing familiarity with this open-endedness, the portion of you that is structurally oriented will discover, hey, this isn't really so threatening. It's not so bad. It's not actually the enemy. Because, what one discovers is that these two modes coexist quite comfortably with each other. They're not a dichotomy. They're not an either or. And it's a fantasy of the structured mode that this open mode is threatening. It isn't really.
Yeah.
And so as through progressive experience, as you discover that it's not intrinsically threatening, the structured mode will relax. It discovers, well, this, he's playing around with all of this openness, but it's not actually hurting me. It's not actually getting in the way of me doing my Machiavellian, egoic, whatever. And so it relaxes. And then you can proceed with the exploration more efficiently. Because again, exploring and going to openness is not the opposite of a structured orientation. They coexist within each other. The structured orientation exists within openness, is in fact made of openness. So as the yoga progresses, it's not like you're leaving one thing and going to another. You're going to another and discovering that the place you started from is actually that other, without needing to be any different. So it's a win-win. Both sides of your internal self, this little self and the big self both win because they turn out to be the same.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to play with that because what I do notice I tend to do is when the structure arises, then I'll investigate the structure,
Right.
And then my attention leaves the openness.
Yeah, but best until you get really established, probably best to ignore the structure and keep pushing to the openness,
Okay.
because the structure is not going anywhere. And the more familiar you are with the openness, you get to a certain point where you can then look back at the structure and notice that it's actually openness too. But until you have a really strong grounding in the openness and a really powerful integration with it, you're liable to, is when you go back to the structure, it's liable to feel really different and really dichotomous, and you're going to be, just kind of in a tug of war with yourself about it.
Thank you.
Not to contradict what you're just saying.
No,
because
please.
You sort of contradicted.
We got a room full of yes men here.
I mean, in a sense, you kind of contradicted yourself earlier, so
I hope
that's
so.
kind of the nature of the beast. But it seems like such a central point that you were making earlier in your conversation with her around this idea, especially if we've been at the spiritual stuff for a while, of imagining that certain ways we describe our experience are not it.
Right.
And it seems to be the thing to sort of recognize that that's not, we're essentially imagining that whatever it is we call enlightenment somehow is not this, by the way that we're defining it as either confused or
Right.
structured, not open,
Right.
and that's it's just simply not the case.
Right.
So, and as you said, that delusion actually isn't delusion.
Right.
And that just seems so central to, that's it, really, to get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wonder if you could just speak a little bit more about how it is that we come to make that mistake in a sense, and imagine that, no, it's not this, it's something else that's more open, that's less structured, that's more spacious, that's more, all the ways that we would characterize it as somehow better, more
Right.
enlightened, more awakened.
Yeah.
And that's the great myth.
Right. Well, it is. I don't know how useful it is to try to deconstruct how that happens. I can say in sort of a comprehensive terms, that happens because the infinite can be seen as finite, which may sound very abstract, but it's actually not. For example, if you're in mathematics, suppose you want to make a number line. You start with nothing. Let's say you start with a piece of paper. The piece of paper has arbitrary open dimensions. It's not any particular size till you take out a ruler and all of a sudden you know what size it is. But so you draw a line and you put a dot on the line and say, okay, this is 0, right? And then you put another dot on the line and say, okay, this is 1. So now we have 0 and 1. We've pinned it down. We've erected a pseudo finiteness, but not really, because it's still just a blank sheet of paper with some lines on it. And the lines are not actually 0 and 1. The lines are not even actually lines. But because it can be presented as if it was that, and presenting it as if it was that is internally consistent with the axioms that it's internally consistent with, it bootstraps itself up into a self-verifying structure. And this is, and that, again, that may sound kind of abstract, but I don't think it's too important how that happens. I think what's more important is to see the way in which that mode, even though viable, and even though intrinsically not a problem, is not really, doesn't limit anything, even though it appears to limit things from its own perspective. But that perspective exists within an actual perspective which completely transcends it and renders it irrelevant.
I really asked the question partly because it seems to be such a powerful force just about for everyone, that the sense of even having seen what you were describing, that what we call closed is not closed, is the openness itself.
Yeah.
It's like the tendency to revert back to that dichotomous way of parsing it is so powerful.
Well, it is. And this, and what you're getting down to now, it seems to me, is that yoga is above all practical. It's not theoretical. It's not something to think about, it's something to do. And in the course of doing it, in the course of, you could say the progression of yoga, what it is that you seem to be doing evolves as you do it. And at a certain point, say from at the point of an earlier phase of the yogic arc, let's call it, at an earlier phase of that, it becomes very relevant to dichotomize. You want to get out of normalcy and discover that there's something that's contrary to that, that's other than that. And so the mode is to differentiate. The mode is not this, something over there maybe. And you try like hell to see if you can find some kind of a something. And then in an intermediate stage, it's kind of it's a very schizophrenic dualistic mode where there's this, but then there's that. And they're so different. And what the hell do they have to do with each other? Intuitively, they kind of are the same, but how does that work? And then you just tie yourself in knots, and you may tend to feel yourself snapping back and forth between these modes. But then in the later arc, as one becomes a more and more mature yogi, one becomes so familiar with and so integrated with let's call it the open condition, the condition of the actual radiant presence, from that perspective, it becomes really clear, or becomes, let's say, sufficiently clear what that is and the way it is what it is. And then one can look back at the finite modes and the structured modes and the modes of definition and discover the way in which that is this and the way in which it's not. In the way in which it's so. And once one discovers the way in which it's so, one will know most intimately the power of this intelligence, and then all of this becomes almost commonplace. It's like, well, of course it has the power to do that. That's nothing. It's doing all this. Why come we couldn't do that? And again, but this is actual and concrete, not abstract. But in practice, in terms of exploration, one has to discover for oneself the way that this is so, for that to have traction, for that perspective to be powerful. I mean, it's relatively easy to play with it abstractly and even see it abstractly, but that won't do you a whole lot of good. I mean, it's looking at all this stuff theoretically. It's all paradox. It's all paradox, isn't it? You can't really say anything positively that, oh, this is this way, because Well, it is and it isn't. And both and neither, and D, none of the above.
Yeah, there's a trick involved. I don't know it. It's not any kind of control of mind. That there's noticing that if I look at it honestly, I'm noticing it from a platform. It has sort of like this solid, consistent place where I'm looking from. That it's, I'm discovering this. I'm sort of this commentary. The self-reference. And there's a noticing that just obliterates that platform, so it kind of just is totally swept up in the maelstrom of this the whole thing's improvising. The whole thing's improvisation. It's swept up in the improvisation of it all. And I don't know that switch very well.
Well, there isn't one. The noticing that is from a platform isn't really noticing. It's just it's claiming that it's noticing. It's a game you play with yourself.
Good. All right.
The real noticing is simply experience itself, which is already the case. It's not something you need to do or not do. You can't not do it. There is no switch. You can't turn it off.
Okay.
So noticing is ultimately noticing that you're already noticing. Noticing is noticing that you can't not notice. Notice is the presence of the engagement of intelligence with radiant presence. And intelligence is always engaged with radiant presence 100%, period, forever, beyond space and time. And so noticing is noticing that fact. So it's obviously not something that you can do or not do. And then you can play all sorts of circumlocucious games about, well, yeah, but you can notice whether you can notice that you're noticing or not noticing. But no, you can't, because that's not real noticing.
The real noticing totally just it deconstructs without having to do anything.
Noticing is presence, pure and simple. Noticing is a fact. It's not an activity. It's not an action. Noticing is presence. And presence is already a done deal. And presence consists of noticing itself. Presence consists of, or let's say it appears to consist of, experiential presence. There's no such thing as presence outside of experience. Presence and experience are one and the same. We have this word experience, which we've invented, which we suppose means something. But all experience really means is reality. It means actuality. And actuality, of course, is presence. And presence is noticing. So you can't not do it. And good noticing is noticing that you can't not do it.
That's what's really fun. Is like it feels like a conspiracy, like it conspires.
Yeah, it plays endless games with itself.
Endlessly.
Yeah.
To just
Yeah.
just to get you.
Yeah, and it's never not going to do that. It dances with itself, and it dances with itself in these infinite worlds and vortices of fractal interaction and implication, which will just twist you up and into endless hamburger. But nothing's being twisted up, and there's no endless hamburger, so it doesn't matter. It's all a zero-sum game. And the more you see what this is, the more that becomes obvious, and then you don't give a shit.
Right.
It's like, okay, it likes to do all this weird fractal shit, and it's like, okay.
It's like a
Whatever.
revolving doorway too.
Yeah.
It just keeps going in and out and in and out. Oh well, and then you're just
Yeah.
having fun because you're just.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the flavor one discovers is having fun. One discovers reality is having fun with itself, and then all of our struggles and aspirations and everything are in that light is like, what, really? Lighten up. Wake up and smell the party. This is a celebration, not a wake.
Yes.
A wake's a celebration. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Peter, I've been playing around with solidity. an interesting one because usually the other senses are very etheric and of solidity. You put your hand on something and you feel the pressure there. And I was wondering about that, and then last week or a couple of days ago, on the 9th, you talked about a ray of sunlight is not about anything. Well, then that sensation of the pressure is not about anything.
Right.
As soon as I did that, it was like I became weightless.
Yeah.
Because then I can see that the whole thing is just immediately expanding out into a world and a person in a world and a planet, blah, 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 a story.
Right.
But when I just look at it as a pure sensation and just look at that sensation,
Yeah.
it's not about anything.
Right. The radiance can look like what we call pressure, but there's no implication in that. It can happen to look that way. But if you look very closely at pressure, you'll discover pressure is way beyond simply being pressure, and you'll discover that you don't know what it is.
Right.
And then you're with radiance. And the same applies to all designatable qualities, of course. The key, in terms of yoga, the key is always to go with what's actually experientially present. So, I feel my butt on the chair, and right away that reifies the notion of, there's a chair and there's a butt and they're pressing against each other and there's gravity and we're in a world and there's matter and blah, blah, blah. There's 10,000 things, whatever, right? But if you look at, so when I'm calling the sensation of my butt on the chair, what is really there experientially? And there's this very strange, I can't say, of course, exactly, but there's this very strange sort of a dynamic, warm kind of a tingling. And then I look more closely at that, and is the tingling really a tingling? Is the warm really warm? Is it? And again, you just look closer and closer and closer at what is actually experientially present that seems to be whatever you've been calling, and you'll discover that you can't possibly pin down what's actually there. But you're not negating it or canceling it. It is there. It is whatever it is, but it's not what you thought it was. And in that being not that, you discover it's more than that. And in that moreness, you discover openness and undefinability, unresolvability. You discover the radiance. And this applies across the board, experientially. It's very simple. You just, anything that seems to be something, look at what you're actually experiencing. When I say look, I don't mean obviously visually, whatever way is appropriate. Be present with what the experience actually experientially consists of, and you will discover it's an unresolvable energetic apparition in your consciousness that you cannot pin down precisely what it is or precisely how it is, and that your characterization of it as being a particular way is just a gross oversimplification, which is always the case. Oversimplification is the way specificity is generated in imagination. What's actually here cannot possibly be simplified. It's way, 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 way too multidimensional and nonlinear, and bazillions of factors that are present and concurrent and implied in every actuality. But the consciousness, the intelligence is so powerful it can take that astounding infinite spectrum and collapse it down to a dominant presentation of, it's my butt on the chair. It's pressure. It's like the feeling of an ass hitting a shitty cushion. Poor choice of words. A meager cushion. Really. But it's all done by oversimplification. And the remedy to that oversimplification, of course, is look at what's actually there, and you'll discover that what's there is not simple. It's explicit, and it's not subtle about it. It's not like it's a subtle thing that it's not simple. It's overtly and explicitly and obviously and grossly not simple. Sensation, any experience, is an inconceivable fractal rainbow of disparate qualities that just don't cohere with each other. And they're intrinsically dynamic. They have no persistence. They have no duration. The whole thing is just this amazing dance of transcendental energies. How can you take that and say, that is this? Anywhere, any experience whatsoever, that applies to. And again, it's concrete. It's not even subtle. It's not even, it doesn't even require a heightened sensitivities to notice this. It's grossly obvious.
It's the words and the concept that sends it off in a different direction.
Well, it doesn't really, but yeah, it pretends to. Words or concepts are oversimplification.
Yeah.
Nothing conforms to actually being what the words that are used to designate it implies that it is. Everything is more than the words that we use to designate it imply. And not just a little more, infinitely more. And again, this is explicit, so you can discover that directly. It's not a subtle thing.
Yeah, the sensation on the butt can't be described.
That's the point.
It's weird.
And yet we pretend to describe it.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, it's this. It's this or it's that, and I don't like it. Or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we use these oversimplifications to create suffering and annoyance for ourselves. Instead of using the open infinite transcendence to create unending infinite bliss. You don't need to create it, it is that actually. And this becomes explicit when one notices that.
That's powerful.
Well, it is powerful.
Well, the whole liking and disliking, I mean, we just completely take that for granted. You can.
To like something or to dislike something, you have to think you know what it is. When you discover you don't know what anything is, you don't know if you like it or not. It's too weird.
Wow.
How can you like it or not? It's like, it's too fucking weird.
Wow.
There's no way you can get a handle on what it is. It's like, do I like it? I don't know.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, I often have the experience in the past where I wake up in the morning and I say, oh, I feel shitty. And I'd say, oh yeah? Well, what is that? I start to look at it and I say,
Yeah.
Oh, that's already changed into something else. So then it's something else. Okay, if there's nothing to that, it's gone. Back to the radio.
What a coincidence. That happens to me every morning. I wake up, oh, fuck. Really? Oh. Actually, that's not just a joke. Unfortunately, it's true.
That's why we're laughing.
As you get older, it's like you wake up and you look in your wallet to see if you had a good time last night. Oh, it wasn't even out last night.
Look on Facebook to see if you had a good time. How can you know if you had fun? Let someone had a video of you doing it.
The video you're talking about the number line. Of course, I have a math degree, so I can go dirty up a blackboard better than anyone, right? But anyway, when you talk about a line, you have these 2 points. Well, if you look at the 2 points, of course, we know that there's a number of points on there, right? And if you use the real number line, there's an infinite number of points. And between each one of those points, there's an infinite number of points ad infinitum.
But you don't even have 2 points because a point isn't a point.
No, you can't say what those are.
A point has no dimension whatsoever, but it's a location. How can a location have no dimension?
That's the axiom part. You have to pretend that you know.
Yeah, you pretend it's defined into existence.
Yeah, you take a point on a piece of paper, you put a point there, you say, where's the point? You got to blow it up to find the center, but you can never stop blowing it up, so you blow it up forever, never finding what the center is, because there isn't any.
That's right.
It's a black hole or a white hole.
Little mathematical aside for the nerds in the group. of which I am one. I'm not embarrassed to say, obviously.
So I would like to ask, because I've been a big fan of I've been a big fan of liking and disliking, and it's been something and so so it's a habit based on memory, and to really be present to whatever this thing is that the mind is saying it doesn't like even if it doesn't like the way this butt feels. I mean, just to be with that experience and to really
look at what's actually there, and you'll discover what's actually there is different in infinite ways than what you're holding to be there. And what you're disliking is the caricature of what you're claiming it to be. And the actuality that it consists of is way, way, way beyond that caricature. Oversimplifications are like caricatures. So the world of a defined world that, say normal consensus reality orientation inhabits is all made of caricatures that don't actually exist. And when you look at see what does exist, simply by looking at any one of the things that is caricaturized and look what's actually experientially present, you'll discover something that completely and obviously is beyond the caricature of it. In other words, there are experiential qualities present that are not being included in the caricature of it, and an unlimited quality and quantity of them. So it's not like you just find one or two little deviations. You'll find nothing but deviation. And eventually you'll wonder, how could I even come up with that?
So being that there's no points in this space, it's a continuum.
Maybe.
You can't even say that.
You can't even say there's a space.
Right.
I mean, mathematics is revealed as completely arbitrary.
Yeah. No, it's
Completely arbitrary.
completely.
There's no starting conditions. You have to, even the starting conditions have to be defined axiomatically. Because intrinsically you can't find what? You can't find anything. It's not nothing, but you can't find anything.
So say you're in this open perspective and you're encountering somebody who fiercely has a conviction in their feelings and what you should be doing, and they want to argue, and and they're there's just a conviction in it, and just curious, how if I'm sort of in this place, with one foot in both worlds, and I can feel my reactivity. It's not like I'm immune.
Sure.
But part of me, it's like I don't even want to wrestle with the convictions.
Right.
And I don't want to disengage.
Right.
So it's just this paradox of how to engage without the conviction, in a real way that's not denying, the strength of their emotions and what they want to wrestle with.
Right.
And I find within myself, I don't even want to wrestle.
Right.
I don't know, just a paradox for me.
Well, it is. In terms of the actual flow of events, what will happen, of course, is what will happen, which will end up being the dominant vector of all the factors that you seem to be present in terms of your various, your various aspects. And some behavioral outcome may ensue, and it'll be what it is. And you may or may not, probably not feel completely satisfied with it. And, but again, what we do doesn't matter. So whether you have a successful or a meaningful exchange with someone in the light of your own, let's say more profound truth or not, is irrelevant. That's not of any importance whatsoever. So in practice, in terms of this yoga, from my perspective, I recommend don't worry about your behavior. Do whatever you do, and you may qualify yourself as relatively successful, or you may not qualify yourself as relatively successful. It doesn't matter, because it has absolutely nothing to do with liberation. Liberation is not about success or failure. Liberation is not about functioning well or functioning poorly. Liberation is about seeing what this is. And paradoxically, when you see what this is, you will discover that you will settle into the maximally efficient mode of your own functioning. I predict. But that's not the point of it. The point of that's just a random accidental byproduct. But basically, so what I recommend is just don't worry about it. Because you're all of the combination of all of your own divergent orientations to the thing will duke it out among themselves and resolve into an actual behavior that will do what it does. That'll lead to where it leads, and it doesn't. You don't actually gain anything or losing anything by what happens anyway. So it really just doesn't matter. So in other words, investing importance in your own functioning is just a way to loop back into a relational orientation to your experience, which basically is, even though intrinsically not a problem, is basically not necessarily particularly helpful in terms of the yoga. So being sort of a carefree madman is a good way to, whether or not you're overtly behaving mad, it can be an inner madness, but being a carefree madman is the ideal conduct of a yogi. And you may be, in being a carefree madman, you may be a conservative, well-behaved, civic person. That may be what the dominant vector of your carefreeness shows up as. It doesn't matter. It's not like you need to be an asshole or out there, doing outrageous things. But if you do, that doesn't matter either. The point is to let go of investing importance in any of that, and then you'll have more energy. Let's say, very, very, very loosely speaking, freed up to look into what this is. It is 12 o'clock now. I'm going to knock off for lunch. As some of you may know, I'm having some health issues. But I think I'm doing well, and I think I'll be able to do the afternoon. What I would request, if you, with your kind permission, is to take a 2-hour lunch break. And that way I can go lie down for a little while and regenerate some energy, theoretically. I can pretend to regenerate some energy. But anyway, so if we reconvene here around 2, there's many, many nice restaurants and places to hang out up and down 4th Street. So I recommend you out for a stroll and enjoy the nice day, food, and I will try to be back here at 2, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I don't know that I've ever had a bushy tail before, but I'll try to have one.